Hello and welcome everyone. Today we are going to look at the big switch on Melbourne's suburban rail network, which is happening on the 1st of February 2026. We're going to have a look at what changes your line will have, and also how to navigate to and from the Metro Tunnel, as well as between the Metro Tunnel and the City Loop. First of all, we will cover the Pakenham, Cranbourne and Sunbury lines. As most people would know by now, these lines are having the most change. All services on the Dandenong and Sunbury lines will begin to run through the Metro Tunnel full time. Most trains will be a Pakenham or Cranbourne to Water Gardens or Sunbury service, as well as the other way around. Some services from the Dandenong lines will terminate at West Footscray, and some services from the Sunbury line will terminate at Westall or Dandenong. Just so you know, I will be referring to the Pakenham and Cranbourne lines as the Dandenong lines. In terms of getting to existing stations, to start off, we will talk about Flinders Street and Southern Cross. For people coming in from the Dandenong lines wanting to go to Flinders Street or Southern Cross, your first option would be to change at Caulfield or Melbourne for a city-bound Frankston train. This will then take you around the City Loop and then out at Southern Cross and then finish at Flinders Street, and then the train will head back to Frankston. Basically, Frankston trains are just returning to the City Loop and doing exactly what the Pakenham and Cranbourne line trains have been doing. However, to get to Flinders Street or Southern Cross, this is not your best option. What you should do is get off at Town Hall and walk through the underpass that links to Flinders Street. So if you were planning on going to Flinders Street, you're already there. But if you're going to Southern Cross, you then jump on any train that's heading towards Southern Cross from Flinders Street, one stop later and you will be there. To get to any of the underground City Loop stations, again, your first option is to change at Caulfield or Melbourne for a city-bound Frankston train. Or, like getting to Flinders Street, you can ride the Metro Tunnel, but this time not to Town Hall, but instead State Library. Like Town Hall is pretty much an extension of Flinders Street, State Library is pretty much an extension of Melbourne Central. Unlike Town Hall's link to Flinders Street, how you have to walk through that underground walkway, State Library's main concourse is pretty much an extension of Melbourne Central's main concourse. So you're already pretty much at Melbourne Central Station when you're in the State Library Station concourse. If you want to get to Parliament or Flagstaff, from here you just get a train from Melbourne Central in whatever direction you need to. The only other two existing stations that the Dandenong lines can no longer access directly is South Yarra and Richmond. You only have one option to get to these really, and that is to change at Caulfield or Melbourne for a city-bound Frankston train. I can't confirm this, but I would hope and assume so, that Metro will run extra services to places like Richmond when there is special events on. If this doesn't happen, I can't imagine how busy a Frankston train would be after 90,000 people attend an AFL game at the MCG. Now time for the western side of things. If you're travelling from the Sunbury line to Flinders Street or Southern Cross, your first option would be to change at Footscray and catch a city-bound Werribee or Williamstown train. Since the trains from Werribee and Williamstown run direct to Flinders Street, I would say if you're coming from Sunbury and you're going to Southern Cross, this would be your best option. The next best option for Southern Cross would be to change at State Library Station in the Metro Tunnel, then walk through to Melbourne Central and get a train from Melbourne Central to Southern Cross to complete your journey. For Sunbury line commuters travelling to Flinders Street though, I think it's obvious that Town Hall would be your best option. If where you're going is closer to Flinders Street Station, then you can walk through the dedicated underpass to interchange with Flinders Street Station or just go straight out the concourse from there. For some travellers though, Town Hall Station might be closer to your destination, so you will just leave the train there and just leave through one of Town Hall's exits rather than going through to Flinders Street. For Sunbury line travellers wanting to go into the City Loop stations, there is not really a first option before you actually go into the Metro Tunnel. This means your first option is at State Library. As I mentioned earlier, State Library's main concourse is basically just an extension of Melbourne Central's concourse. So if you're going to Melbourne Central, you're basically already there. If you're going to Parliament or Flagstaff, you can just catch a City Loop train whichever way you need. Now we will talk about the Frankston line. For the past 5 or so years, the Frankston line has been part of the Cross City Group. This means trains would originate at Frankston, operate a service into the city via Flinders Street and Southern Cross, and then end up going out towards Werribee or Williamstown. This meant if you were catching a train at somewhere like Carrum, Chelsea or Mordialloc, all the information display screens at the stations and the front of the train would show destinations like Newport, Williamstown, Laverton or Werribee. This is no longer the case though with the big switch, as since the Pakenham and Cranbourne lines are now not operating in the city loop, the Frankston line will go back in the loop. This means Frankston line commuters will now have better access to the city and no longer have to change trains to access the city loop. If you're coming from the Frankston line though and want to go into the Metro Tunnel, just like if you're coming from Pakenham and Cranbourne and wanting to go into the city loop, your first two options are Caulfield and Melbourne. For Frankston line passengers going to the Metro Tunnel, these two stations are probably your best option. My reasoning for this is because the Pakenham and Cranbourne line trains do not stop at Armidale, Toorak or Hawkesburn, and then they go straight into the Metro Tunnel. If you're travelling to Anzac Station, this is with no question your best option, and probably the same if you're going to Town Hall. However though, since Town Hall is basically linked to Flinders Street, you can just stay on your Frankston line train round the city loop and get to Flinders Street, but it may be quicker to change at Caulfield and Melbourne for that Metro Tunnel service. If you are going to State Library, Parkville or Arden from the Frankston line, I'd probably say the best option is to stay on the Frankston train to Melbourne Central, walk through to State Library Station, and if that's where you're going, you are already there. But if you need to go to Parkville or Arden, you then need to catch a Metro Tunnel service towards Sunbury from State Library. Like I said, I don't know why you would need to change if you were going to Town Hall or State Library because they're linked to Flinders Street and Melbourne Central, but just thought I may as well mention it. For the Werribee and Williamstown lines though, for the time being, they will terminate at Flinders Street. Later on in 2026, these lines will continue to through run and go to Sandringham instead of Frankston. This will give Sandringham a massive frequency boost, as the Werribee-Williamstown lines together is a pretty frequent service. For changing to the Metro Tunnel from Werribee or Williamstown, the first option would be to change at Footscray and catch Sunbury line train heading towards Dandenong. This is definitely your best option if you are heading to Arden, Parkville or State Library. This is also your best option if you are heading to the City Loop, because you can catch a Metro Tunnel train to State Library and then change for Melbourne Central or catch a train from Melbourne Central to Parliament or Flagstaff. For accessing Southern Cross or Flinders Street, it is not really any different because you just stay on your train until you get there. At Flinders Street though, you can change for Town Hall Station, and if you are travelling to Anzac Station on the Metro Tunnel, your best option is to catch a train from Town Hall. Another option to access the City Loop from the Werribee and Williamstown lines is changing at North Melbourne. But that's nothing different, as that's how you always used to do it anyway from Werribee or Williamstown. For passengers on the Upfield, Craigeburn, Hurstbridge, Mernda, Belgrave, Lilydale, Alamein and Glen Waverley lines, to access the Metro Tunnel, your only two options are either at Flinders Street by changing to Town Hall Station, or Melbourne Central by changing to State Library Station. And since it's technically classed as a Metro train line, Stony Point passengers will have to catch a Frankston train and either change at Caulfield, Melbourne Central for State Library, or Flinders Street for Town Hall. If you are travelling from any of these lines except for Stony Point and you are trying to get to Anzac or Town Hall, your best option is to go to Flinders Street and walk through to Town Hall Station. Obviously, if you're going to Town Hall, you're already there, but if you're going to Anzac, you need to catch a Dandenong bound train one stop. If you are going to State Library, Parkville or Arden, your best option would be to change at Melbourne Central to connect with State Library Station. Again, if you're going to State Library, you're already there. But if you're going to Parkville or Arden, you catch a Sunbury line bound train, one stop for Parkville, two stops for Arden. Adding on from earlier, the only other station that the Sunbury line can no longer access directly is North Melbourne. There is only one logical option here, and that is to change at Footscray for a city-bound Werribee or Williamstown train. Another thing happening with the big switch is that the tracks between Flinders Street and South Yarra that the Pakenham and Cranbourne lines used to use will now only be served by V-Line. V-Line do stop at Richmond, so those platforms will be used, but they do not stop at South Yarra. In my opinion, you could run a shuttle service between Flinders Street and South Yarra using those platforms. Or, if the Melton and Wyndham Vale electrification ever happens, I think it might be a good idea to run them through to South Yarra. Do I think either of these will happen? No, but it's just a thought. On the 31st of January 2026, I noticed at South Yarra the line colour has changed on the signs. Platform 5 is now Frankston line green, and Platform 6 has been covered up with a white strip. At Richmond, Platform 5 has been covered up with a white strip as well. Not sure about Platform 6, but I am assuming the same. One very interesting thing about the big switch is the night network with the Metro Tunnel. 4 of the 5 new Metro Tunnel stations will be closed during the night network. The only one that will be open is Town Hall, and I'm assuming that is because it links to Flinders Street. The City Loop stations are also not open on the night network, so I guess it is consistent there. But I feel at least Anzac, Parkville and Arden should be open during the night network. These 3 stations have brought trains to where they have never been before, so I feel like people may be using that just as if it's a normal service. Especially if the area around Arden has heaps of housing development in the future. In my opinion, Parkville is a big miss for the night network because it gives people access to hospitals. With State Library, I can understand if that was shut because it links to Melbourne Central, but still, I think there should be more Metro Tunnel stations other than Town Hall that are open. One of the last things we will talk about is frequencies. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the frequencies because other YouTubers have already done heaps of research and they have great videos on them. To start off frequencies, we will talk about the corridor between Dandenong and West Footscray. Stations between these 2 stations will get a train a minimum of every 10 minutes all day. So that is about 5 AM to midnight. In peak times, trains are nearly as frequent as 3 minutes. There is a few gaps in the timetable though that are a little bit bigger than 3 minutes, but that's just because a Traralgon or Bairnsdale V-Line train needs a gap to go through. It is worth noting that the corridor between Dandenong and Flinders Street via the City Loop has had daytime frequencies of 10 minutes already. This means that over 30 extra weekday services will be adding a few services in the peak periods to make trains nearly as frequent as every 3 minutes, but also we'll be adding a lot of extra early morning and late night services, making the frequency every 10 minutes all day. Again, with the extra 80 or so Saturday trains and the over 70 extra Sunday trains, these will mostly be in the early mornings or late at night. Now time for the corridor between Dandenong, East Pakenham and Cranbourne. These train lines will have a minimum frequency of every 20 minutes all day. This is the same between West Footscray and Sunbury, having a minimum frequency of every 20 minutes all day. Again, for the Pakenham and Cranbourne lines, the extra services are just mainly early mornings and late at night, but over in the west is where the major changes are. On a weekday, the Sunbury line has nearly 200 extra services, and on Saturday and Sunday, roughly around 130 new services each day. Between about 6 AM and 8 PM, West Footscray to Water Gardens will have a train every 10 minutes, while Water Gardens to Sunbury will have a minimum frequency of 20 minutes all day. This is actually a huge change for Sunbury because between Water Gardens and Sunbury, trains used to be every 40 minutes off peak, and from the city to Water Gardens used to be every 20 minutes, which is now 10. In peak hour at Sunbury, it looks like you'll be able to get a train every 10 minutes. As mentioned earlier, when Werribee and Williamstown trains begin to through run with the Sandringham line, Sandringham will also get a massive increase in frequency. Off-peak, Sandringham trains run to a 15 to 20 minute frequency, but when the Werribee and Williamstown lines join them, they will likely get a 10 minute frequency. This obviously isn't early mornings or late at night, but mainly in between and just before and after major peak periods. I have heard that frequency increases may occur on the Frankston line, but like the Sandringham line, this won't be till later 2026. At this stage, there is really no frequency benefits for the Mernda, Hurstbridge, Belgrave, Lilydale, Alamein and Glen Waverley lines. From my understanding, these lines were also said to be benefited from the Metro Tunnel, but a lot of people have speculated that nothing will actually happen for these lines. The main reason for this is because the City Loop is made up of 4 tunnels. These tunnels are visible on the network map. The green is the Caulfield Loop, the dark blue is the Burnley Loop, the red is the Clifton Hill Loop, and the yellow is the Northern Loop. The light blue going through the middle is the Metro Tunnel, but we don't need to worry about that for a minute. The green Caulfield Loop is now used by the Frankston line, but before the big switch it was only used by the Pakenham and Cranbourne lines. Frankston lines did originally use this as well up until 2021, but then they were taken out to free up some space. This is how the Frankston line has benefited because now they get back into the City Loop. Before the big switch, the yellow Northern Loop was used by the Sunbury, Craigeburn and Upfield lines. From the 1st of February 2026, when the big switch happens, the Sunbury lines will be taken out and put into the Metro Tunnel. While the Craigeburn and Upfield line don't really get many changes anyway, I would expect them to in the future. The Upfield line is a little bit limited by the single track section after Gowrie. It is only possible to have a maximum 14-minute frequency between Gowrie and Upfield. Since between Batman and Upfield, the maximum frequency is every 14 minutes, it would be nice if this could be the frequency all day during the daytime. The reason there is basically no benefits on the Mernda, Hurstbridge, Belgrave, Lilydale, Alamein and Glen Waverley lines is because they operate through the Clifton Hill Loop and the Burnley Loop. As you can see on the map, they never did mix with the East Pakenham, Cranbourne or Sunbury line trains, meaning they have not benefited from those lines going into the Metro Tunnel. It still would have been nice to benefit these lines by operating a 20-minute or less frequency during the daytime. For example, off-peak, trains between Eltham and Hurstbridge operate to a 40-minute frequency. I feel like all the lines with a frequency above 20 minutes should be cut down to about that. You can't say that they should be every 10 all over the network, because in some places that just isn't possible. For example, Eltham to Hurstbridge, which we were just talking about, has a maximum frequency of every 20 minutes. This is due to the single track, and there is multiple other places around the network that also cannot run every 10 minutes due to single track. These are Batman to Upfield, Murrulbach to Lilydale, and the Altona Loop between Newport and Laverton. Some V-line train lines are getting a couple extra services, such as the Echuca and Traralgon lines. Echuca gets 4 extra weekend services, so that's a return service each Saturday and Sunday. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it is a helpful guide to how to use the Metro Tunnel. If you have any questions or thoughts, I would love to hear them in the comments. If you did enjoy this video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. And thanks again. Bye for now.